Hello everyone, I am the monstergamedev, and welcome back to some Unity tutorials. So, this time, we're going to be going over the basics of coding in Unity. Nothing fancy, just the very simple stuff you need to get started with coding in Unity. So, to do this, you're going to need something called Visual Studios. Now, I have it already installed right here. Now, I don't know if it actually comes with Windows 10 or not. You may have to install it yourself, just in case you do. I'll have a link in the description for you. So you can go ahead and install that and then get started with some coding. So to actually create a new script, you just have to right click, go under create, and C# script. So make sure when you name your script, you don't actually put any spaces in it, because otherwise Unity won't be able to find the script, because that's how Visual Studios works. So we'll just name it something like Coding Basics. Simple name. And then to open it, just double click it. Then open up in Visual Studios. So we're going to go through everything in the script with the namespaces, functions, the name of the script and everything, and then last we're going to go over variables. So the first thing at the very top here is something called a namespace. Now a namespace helps define a script. And so if you have a lot of the script of the same name, it won't get, if like Unity's trying to call it, it won't get confused. So if you have a lot of scripts with like a chase function, Unity won't get confused if you're trying to call that function. So if you're trying to call that chase function, Unity has to figure out which one it is. And if you have like 10 scripts with the same function, then Unity's going to get confused because all is the same name. So namespaces, which we'll do this in the test script, you can make by putting namespace, and then the name of your script is just put coding, and then curly bracket, get rid of this first one, and then come down to the bottom, and after this last curly bracket, another curly bracket. Now this script is under the namespace of coding. So if we wanted to use this script, so if we come over to here, if we wanted to use anything that was in that test script, we have to go to the top and add the namespace using coding, and then semicolon. Now we would be able to use anything from that script. This way it doesn't get confusing, so if we're in another script and we call that chase function, and we have it under a namespace of enemy1, it doesn't get confused with all the other scripts that have the same function name. So that's where namespaces are come in handy. So Unity Engine, it's always going to be used, but Unity has a lot of others. You have the Unity Engine AI, you have UI, a lot of other stuff you can use, and Unity has them all separated so that it makes coding a lot easier and just cleaner. So after the namespaces, you have this right here, the public class coding basics : monodevelop. So what this is the public, meaning that it's other scripts can access it. The namespace comes in handy for that, but you can also just put private. The namespaces are better because it's if you want it to be private but still accessible. Private means you don't want other scripts accessing it at all. So, and the class defines, it comes before what we want to name our script, which is coding basics. And then the mono behavior is the type of script it's going to be. So after that, you'll notice we have two lines of code under that, and these are functions. These two specific functions are special functions because they're Unity functions. They're pre-programmed to do something. So, the void start right here, as you see what it says right here, start is called before the first frame of the game. Well, what this is actually doing is this will actually make something happen in the first frame of the game. So, if we wanted to put something in here, let's just put a debug.log. We want to just put something like update. Well now, if we go ahead and do Unity, go over to our cube, and we add our script to it, you'll notice when we hit play over in the console, a message will pop up once. There it is, right there, update. Now the void update updates every frame of the game. So if we go ahead and take this and put in the void update, it'll constantly update. I mean, we'll be getting that message multiple times. So now if we hit play, you'll see it constantly popping up in the console. See that? You see that number over there just rising and rising? And we'll keep doing that while the game is running. Now, not everything you put in void update will happen constantly. It's a matter of how you set it. But for a lot of things, it'll constantly, this way, if it's constantly has to happen, even if it's under certain conditions, it'll constantly happen this way. So lastly, for the functions, well, I'm going to show you how to make your own function. Real simple. All you have to do is put void, because you don't want it to return something. and then put the name of your function. Let's my function, because I am very creative. Then you have to put two parentheses and then curly brackets. Everything that's in between these two curly brackets, all our code that's in here, is going to happen when this function gets called. So in other words, when the function gets called, it's when the script is asking, run all the code that's inside this box of a sort. So if we go ahead and take this debug.log, put it in here, it'll say update in the console, but only if our function is called. Because if I go back to Unity now, and I hit play, it actually won't show up in the console. You see down here, it's playing, everything's moving around, but there's no update function. But there's nothing that says that in the console. So we actually have to call the function. And to do that, all you have to do is put the name of the function, parentheses, then colon, or semicolon anyways. Now, because I put in void start, immediately as soon as the game starts, we'll see the debug.log show up. So when we hit play, boom, right down here in the console. So that's where your own function comes in handy. It won't work the same as Unity's, but it's good for when you want it to only happen when you want it to. So if you want to have just messages pop up from a certain function, and you only want it to happen at certain times, this will be good when it happens. This will be a good way to do it. So, lastly, out of everything, let's go over variables. Now, there are 4 different types of variables. There are floats, ints, bools, and strings. Now, floats can hold a decimal number. So anything, negative 3.2 up to whatever number, 7.5, anything. Any decimal number. So to write this, we could put something like public, which public just simply means we can see it in the inspector. Otherwise, we could not put public or put private to make it private, so we can't see it in the inspector. But I'll make it public, and let's put float, float, and then just name it number. So there we go. Now we have a float. And if we actually come back to Unity, you'll go ahead and see it down here. Next, see our number function is right here. You'll see our number float is right there, and it has the default value of 0. We can change that, actually, if we give it a different default value. So if we want to give it like 3.5, and make sure you put F after your number so it knows it's a float. And you can see it has a default value of 3.5. So we don't have to give it a default value. We could just leave it blank and have the player change it if they want. If it is public, if it's not, depends on how you're using it. You most likely want to give it a value, but depends on what you're doing. So after the float, a variable similar to that is the int. An int is pretty much the same thing, except it can only hold a whole number. So any number from, just any number that's not between another number. So you can't put any 3.5s in there, but you can't put anything 1, 2, 3, or 5, or negatives as well. Negative 3 point, or not 3 points, sorry. Negative 3 or negative 5. So to write this, all we have to do is we'll make a public, and we put int, and we give it a name as well. So we'll put Bunder. Did not know I was writing that. Don't know how that got there, but whatever. And so we can same thing. We don't have to give it a value, but I'll give it a value of, let's just say, 5. We don't have to put F after it, or I, because it knows if it doesn't have the F that it's not a float. Now you'll notice if I try putting 3.6, it's not going to work. See the little error we get there. An int can't hold any decimal numbers. So after the ints, we have bools. Now, bools are just a variable that are used to say whether something's true or false, like if a player is alive or not. So if we wanted to put something like that, let's say public, and then we just put bool, and then we'll put is alive, and then we could just leave it how it is, and the default value will be 0, or sorry, not 0, but false, but we'll make it true. The player is indeed alive. So now the value would be true. And actually, because these are all public, let's head over to Unity real quick. You'll see them all pop up down here, actually. So right here, you can see the int under Bunder, I guess, is down here. And you'll see the number float right above it. And the is alive, because it's a bool and it can only be true or false, there's a little box we can tick on or off. So, last one to go over is a string. Now a string defines a text. So we want to maybe use it for like a state of an enemy, where an enemy is, okay, he's in a idle state right now. Well, we could put public, we'll put state is equal, whoops, did not want you to do that, Unity. Stop auto-putting stuff for me. Is equal to, and then in quotation marks, we'd have to put idle. Whoops, I seem to have made a mistake. As you notice, I did not put string. You have to actually put string to define which variable it is. So now we have a state of idle, and it depends on what you're doing. I would not necessarily recommend putting the string public or making it public, because you can change it in here. It's usually better if it's private, but it does depend on what you're doing. So me, I've never used it as public before. I always keep it as private. It's a lot better because it's better not to mess with it. But again, it does depend on what you're doing. There are cases where you can, but it's ultimately up to you. And now, believe it or not, that's it for the basics. That's the very, of course, that's also the very, very basics. But the very basics are what we need right now. So this way you have an idea of it. I would suggest you play around with it. Just see which scripts you can make up. See what you can do with it. This way you can get a feel for it and what you're doing. Yeah. Simple as that. It seems, you think programming would be really hard. It can get complicated, but it depends on what you're doing. It all depends on what you're doing, really. I say that a lot because it really does ultimately depend on what you're doing. There's a lot of stuff, even you can make a really good game with doing the very basic programming. It doesn't have to be anything complicated or fancy. Just be a few lines of code that make something happen. Simple as that. So, I'm going to be ending this tutorial here. Next time, I actually don't know what we're going to be going over. Mystery. But you'll find out then. Because for now, this has been another Unity tutorial, specifically on coding basics. Hopefully, you learned a lot, and I will see you